Imagine being chosen by a king, only to realize that your calling was far greater than any crown. What if everything you've lived, every pain, every silence, every closed door, was actually a divine push toward a purpose you haven't fully seen yet? This is the story of Queen Esther. But listen closely. This isn't just another Bible story told on autopilot. What you're about to discover might completely change how you see your position, your struggles, and even your delays. Yes, a simple woman was crowned, but her real power didn't come from her beauty. It came from her obedience. In a world obsessed with recognition, Esther chose purpose, and that choice made her the vessel of deliverance for an entire nation. Why do you think you are exactly where you are right now? Have you considered that maybe it's not coincidence, but divine strategy? Because when God positions, He also equips. Today, you'll understand why favor often comes with responsibility, and why that seemingly ordinary opportunity in your life might actually be the beginning of a divine assignment. Are you ready? The empire of King Ahasuerus was so vast that if he were alive today, he'd need more than one passport to cross his own borders. He ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from North Africa to India, with an authority that made even the boldest generals tremble. But behind all the glitter and gold, a shadow loomed. A threat not from outside, but from within the palace itself. And so begins this Bible story about courage and divine purpose. Queen Esther's moment was coming. While people went about their daily lives, someone close to the throne was plotting destruction. His name? Haman. Clever, persuasive, and completely driven by pride and vanity. He didn't just crave recognition, he demanded worship. And when he didn't get it from one man, he sought to annihilate an entire people. Queen Esther had no idea yet, but her calling was about to awaken. Imagine living in a world where a snap of the fingers could decide who lives and who dies. That was the Persian Empire. King Ahasuerus held great power, but he was also easily influenced. And Haman knew how to play this game like a master. He used the king's pride as bait, setting a trap disguised as loyalty. Haman planted seeds of fear in the king's heart. He said there was a people who didn't follow the empire's laws, claiming they were a threat to stability. The king, trusting Haman more than his own instincts, signed the decree. It was official. The Jews were marked for extermination. And that, my friend, is not just ancient history. It's a warning about the misuse of influence. This moment in Queen Esther's Bible story teaches us something powerful. Danger doesn't always wear a menacing face. Sometimes it speaks elegantly, dresses well, and even walks beside us. That's why discernment is more precious than intelligence. Knowing who surrounds you is a form of divine protection. Not everyone who speaks for you is truly with you. Haman offered a fortune to the king in exchange for permission to destroy the Jews. Unreal, yet absolutely true. He basically said, "Let me kill them, and I'll fill your treasury." Think about it. How many times in today's world are decisions bought, authorities swayed, and truth twisted for money? History repeats itself, just with new costumes. And this is where Queen Esther's role quietly begins to form. She didn't know how serious things were, but she was being positioned. Have you ever noticed how sometimes God starts moving you without explaining why? A job change, a relocation, even a heartbreak. It could all be part of a divine setup. His plans never fail. When the people learned of the decree, grief swept through the streets. Imagine seeing your future wiped away by a signature from someone who doesn't even know your name. But in the middle of chaos, there's always a seed of hope. And sometimes, that hope shows up wrapped in grace, courage, and faith. She hadn't spoken yet, but her silence held a divine answer. The Bible shows us that even in dark times, purpose is always at work behind the scenes. Queen Esther was in the palace, yes, but she carried a hidden legacy, an unseen identity. For now, it reminds us that no matter where you are today, God may be using you for something far greater than you realize. In fact, think about it. What if the position you hold today, whether it's a job that feels mundane or a situation that seems random, is exactly where God needs you? Maybe like Queen Esther, you're closer to the throne than you think, and your voice, even if still silent, may be the very key to shifting destiny. Never underestimate the place you're in. This part of the Bible story feels like a movie scene that grows more intense with each moment. And let's be honest, how many times has life felt that way too? Problems escalate, darkness thickens, and the solution seems distant. But that's exactly when God begins moving the unseen pieces. And the next piece, it was already in motion. What Haman didn't know was that his decree triggered something far greater. A divine, silent, strategic movement. While he celebrated, heaven was working. And this is why we should never underestimate the quiet seasons. Queen Esther was being shaped for a specific time, and that time was drawing near. She was born Hadassah, a young Hebrew girl whose parents were long gone. Raised by her older cousin Mordecai, she learned early on how to survive in a world that didn't make space for people like her. Her life was quiet, hidden, until one royal decree changed everything. The king was searching for a new queen, and Esther, without knowing, was about to walk into destiny's front door. Her story was never meant to be ordinary. Now imagine being taken from your home, groomed for a palace you never dreamed of entering, and asked to hide your true identity. That's exactly what happened to Queen Esther. She concealed her heritage, her people, her name. In the palace, she wasn't Hadassah, she was Esther. And yet, even in hiding, divine favor wrapped around her like a cloak. She found grace where others were overlooked. The Bible story of Queen Esther reminds us that sometimes our elevation comes in strange packaging. She didn't choose the palace life. She didn't campaign for a crown. But she was chosen, positioned, for something greater than appearances. And that's how God often works. He hides royalty inside the humble. Think about it. How many people overlook their potential because it doesn't look the way they expected? Esther's story is for every person who ever felt like they didn't belong in the room they were placed in. She entered the palace with no noble name, no royal training, just obedience, humility, and a quiet strength. And that was enough. Sometimes, favor is better than credentials. When God opens the door, you don't need to force your way through it. Imagine the pressure Esther faced daily, pretending to be someone she wasn't, surrounded by luxury, but carrying a hidden burden. It's not much different today. How many people live two lives? Outwardly successful, but inwardly wrestling with identity, faith, and purpose. Esther's courage wasn't just in speaking up later. It began in how she waited, quietly, faithfully, with wisdom. In a palace filled with competition, Esther stood out, not by being the loudest, but by being the most authentic. And in a world obsessed with self-promotion, that's a radical lesson. You don't have to market your greatness when your presence carries grace. God's favor can't be outshined by ambition. Esther became queen, not because she forced it, but because she was formed for it. Think about this. What if the hardship you're going through now is actually part of your preparation? Esther didn't know that being orphaned would prepare her to understand loneliness in the palace. She didn't know that obedience to Mordecai would train her heart to obey God later. Nothing in your story is wasted. It all connects, even the parts you wish you could erase. Esther didn't just walk into the palace. She walked into a divine assignment. And maybe that's where you are too. You think you're just surviving, just making it. But what if you're in the middle of being positioned? Pay attention. Doors don't always look like doors at first. Sometimes they look like detours, disappointments, or even delays. One of the most powerful truths we learn from Queen Esther is that timing is everything. She didn't rush her moment. She didn't try to speak before the right time. She waited, watched, listened. And that's a lost art today. In a world addicted to speed, Esther teaches us the beauty of preparation. Divine purpose is never in a hurry. Esther's transformation is a quiet revolution. From hidden to highlighted, from silence to strategy. And maybe that's your journey too. You don't have to be seen by everyone to be used by God. Let your character grow in private, because one day, your influence will speak in public. Like Esther, you are being prepared. It's fascinating how the one who hid their identity would, one day, risk everything to reveal it. There's a poetic beauty in that. Sometimes what we hide in fear, God later uses as a weapon of freedom. Your pain, your past, your process, they all become part of the purpose. Esther's silence had a shelf life, and the time to speak was getting close to being seen. So now we watch as Queen Esther, once the hidden orphan, becomes the person through whom destinies would turn. But the weight of the mission hadn't yet been revealed. What they didn't know was that everything they'd been through had only been training for what was about to come next. Mordecai wasn't just a guardian to Esther. He was a man of unshakable principles. Living in the shadow of the Persian Empire, he still held tightly to his identity and faith. One day, he uncovered a plot that could have cost the king his life. Without hesitation, he reported it. No applause, no recognition, just a loyal man doing what was right, even when no one was watching. The king was saved, yet Mordecai's name wasn't even mentioned in the royal record books. He walked away unnoticed, unrewarded, and unbothered. Why? Because when your motives are pure, you don't need validation to do the right thing. That's a lesson in integrity. Doing the right thing should never depend on who's paying attention. Meanwhile, Haman's star was rising fast. He climbed the ranks, basking in admiration, demanding reverence from everyone in the court, and most people bowed. Most, but not Mordecai. He stood firm, refusing to kneel before any man. It wasn't arrogance, it was conviction. Mordecai bowed only to God, and that made him dangerous in the eyes of the proud. Haman noticed the defiance, and it wasn't just a bruise to his ego, it was a threat to his prideful identity. He couldn't tolerate the idea that someone in the kingdom didn't worship him like the rest. This wasn't about respect, it was about control, and Mordecai's quiet resistance set off a firestorm that would soon consume the empire. There's something deeply powerful in Mordecai's courage. He teaches us that strength isn't always loud. It's consistent. He didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't protest. He simply stood. In a world that pressures people to blend in, Mordecai's faith made him stand out. And that's a reminder to anyone struggling to stay true in a culture that rewards compromise. Haman's fury grew like wildfire, and when he found out Mordecai was Jewish, his hatred expanded beyond one man. He wanted revenge, not just on Mordecai, but on all of Mordecai's people. That's how dangerous unchecked ego can be. It never stops at one target. It spreads, corrupts, and devours. Haman wasn't just offended, he was intoxicated by power. This Bible story about Queen Esther isn't just about palaces and crowns. It's about people standing firm when everything around them says, "Sit down." Mordecai's example reminds us that spiritual strength isn't about being the loudest voice, but the most faithful heart. Even when the crowd bows, your soul doesn't have to follow. Let's get practical. Are there areas in your life where you felt pressure to bow, to standards, to culture, to expectations that go against your faith? Take a moment to reflect. Like Mordecai, your quiet stand could influence generations. One book that explores this idea beautifully is Live Not by Lies by Rod Dreher. It's a modern take on ancient courage. Mordecai's silence wasn't passivity, it was preparation. He was watching, discerning, trusting. Sometimes your influence grows in the seasons where you're overlooked, and when the time comes, that faithfulness will speak louder than any title. Queen Esther may have worn the crown, but Mordecai carried the wisdom that would help guide her next steps. There's irony here. The man who saved the king's life was forgotten, and the man who threatened it was exalted. But God sees what man forgets. He writes things in heaven that this world ignores. So if you've ever felt invisible, know this: heaven keeps perfect records. Your faithfulness has never gone unnoticed. The tension was rising, and Mordecai could feel it in the air. Haman's anger, the king's silence, the people's fear, it was all building. But Mordecai didn't retreat. He didn't compromise. He kept showing up faithful as ever. Because that's what real leadership looks like. Quiet, courageous, and consistent. And just as Mordecai's conviction began to rattle the halls of power, Esther was watching from within. The time was coming when her inner fire would need to meet his unwavering strength. A moment of decision was drawing near. One morning, everything changed. A royal proclamation echoed through the empire. On a specific day, all Jews were to be destroyed. Men, women, children, no one spared. The reason? One man's pride, and the price, an entire people. The Bible. Story of Queen Esther takes a darker turn here. But even in the shadows, purpose still breathes. Mordecai's world collapsed. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and wept in the streets. But he didn't stop there. He sent word to Queen Esther, pleading with her to do something, anything. He reminded her that silence wasn't safety. Not for her, not for anyone. Her position came with purpose, and purpose often requires risk. Esther's first response was fear. After all, approaching the king uninvited was punishable by death. Even queens weren't exempt. She hesitated. She wrestled. And can we blame her? Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you choose to do in spite of it. Her faith was about to be tested like never before. Mordecai didn't just beg. He revealed a deeper truth. Who knows if you were made queen for such a time as this? That question still echoes today. Maybe you're not where you are by accident. Maybe your job, your relationships, your challenges, all of it is part of something greater. Divine placement has a purpose. This moment in the Bible story shows us how God often places people in key positions not for comfort, but for confrontation. Esther was the only one with access to the king. But access without action is wasted potential. It's not enough to be near the throne. You must also be willing to speak from it. Let's be real. Esther could have chosen self-preservation. She could have hidden behind her crown, behind the rules, behind fear. But deep down, she knew. The cost of silence would be far greater than the risk of speaking. And that's a lesson for all of us. Playing it safe isn't always the safest option. Mordecai's plea wasn't manipulative. It was prophetic. He didn't pressure her. He called her higher. That's what real leadership looks like. Not forcing people, but awakening them. If you've ever needed someone to believe in your purpose more than you did, you know how powerful that kind of voice can be. Sometimes we need someone to shake us out of comfort and remind us of the bigger picture. Mordecai was that voice for Esther. Do you have a voice like that in your life? And more importantly, are you that voice for someone else? Courage is contagious when it flows from love and conviction. The edict Haman authored was signed with the king's seal. It couldn't be undone. That's how dangerous influence can be when placed in the wrong hands. And yet, God wasn't surprised. Even when laws were written to kill, heaven had already written a greater plan. What's signed on paper isn't more powerful than what's written in purpose. In moments like these, people often freeze. They wait for signs, for certainty, for guarantees. But Esther had none of that. All she had was a choice. And maybe that's where you are too. Not sure of the outcome, but holding an opportunity to shift the story. Faith moves even when the path is unclear. Let this sink in. The same Esther who once hid her identity was now being called to expose it for the sake of her people. Full circle. What once felt like protection now had to become vulnerability. And sometimes the boldest thing you can do is reveal who you really are. No more hiding. As the dust settled over the city and fear gripped the Jewish people, one thing was certain. A decision had to be made. Esther stood at the crossroads of safety and purpose, and whatever she chose would shape the future not just for her, but for a nation. Esther's heart was pounding. The weight of her people's fate rested on her next move. So, instead of rushing, she paused. She called for a fast. 3 days, no food, no water. Not just for herself, but for all the Jews in the city. In that silence, in that surrender, something deeper began to rise. Clarity. This wasn't about royalty anymore. It was about responsibility. Esther understood that her beauty, her position, even her access to the king, weren't just blessings. They were tools, and every tool has a purpose. When you realize that your gifts are not just for you, everything shifts. That's when calling becomes action. The fast wasn't about changing God's mind, it was about preparing her heart. And maybe that's what you need too. Sometimes clarity doesn't come in noise, but in stillness. In 3 days of consecration, Esther moved from fear to faith. And when the time came, she dressed in royal robes, not just for fashion, but as a sign of readiness. Imagine walking into a room where your presence could mean your death. Esther knew the risk. The law was clear. Anyone who approached the king without being summoned could be executed, unless he extended the golden scepter. It was life or death. And yet, she walked in. That's not drama. That's destiny in motion. This Bible story teaches us that divine moments don't always come with clarity. They come with courage. Esther didn't wait until she felt fearless. She moved in faith. And that's something many need to hear. Waiting for fear to disappear might keep you stuck forever. Sometimes you have to act while your knees are still shaking. When the king saw her, something shifted. Grace met courage, and the golden scepter was extended. That small gesture, it wasn't just royal protocol, it was a divine confirmation. Heaven responds when you move in alignment. Sometimes, one step of obedience invites a flood of favor. Let's bring it to real life. Have you been sensing a moment where you need to speak up, shift something, confront a fear? Don't ignore it. You might be in your such a time as this season. Try taking 3 days of intentional prayer and fasting. Journal, read the book of Esther, and ask, why am I here, now? This phrase, for such a time as this, has echoed for generations. It's more than poetic, it's prophetic. It reminds us that timing matters, that you're not late, that your presence in this moment, in this world, is intentional, and that God doesn't make random moves. If you're breathing, you're called. Esther could have said no. She could have let fear win. But her yes changed history. And it wasn't a loud yes. It was a trembling, whispered one. But whispered obedience still moves mountains. Sometimes, what shifts nations isn't a shout. It's a surrendered soul saying, I'll go. It's powerful to realize that Esther didn't go in alone. She carried her people's prayers with her. That's the beauty of spiritual community. When you don't have strength, others can fast and pray with you. You were never meant to carry your calling alone. Purpose is personal, but it's never isolated. And the outcome? It wasn't immediate. The story wasn't over, but something had already changed. Esther had stepped into alignment. And when you align with purpose, the path ahead, though still uncertain, starts to open. Obedience unlocks what fear tries to block. As Esther took that first step into the king's court, everything hung in the balance. But something was different now. She wasn't just a queen, she was a vessel. And the God who positioned her was about to reveal why she had been chosen all along. The moment had come. Esther wasn't just surviving anymore. She was leading. And she did it with strategy. Instead of blurting out her request, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet. Then a second one. This wasn't hesitation. It was divine timing. Esther understood something powerful. Sometimes, what you say matters less than when you say it. The Bible story shows how wisdom and patience can dismantle even the most dangerous plots. Over dinner and wine, Esther set the stage. She allowed tension to rise, let Haman get comfortable, and waited until the exact moment. That's a lesson right there. Don't rush revelation. Some truths carry more weight when they're revealed in the right setting. At the second banquet, with courage in her chest and purpose in her voice, Esther finally spoke. She looked the king in the eye and said, "Spare my life and the life of my people." Silence fell. The king leaned in, and for the first time, Haman realized this wasn't just dinner. It was divine confrontation. The king, confused and enraged, asked, "Who would dare threaten my queen?" And Esther pointed, "This wicked Haman." You could almost hear the air leave the room. The same man who had plotted genocide was now exposed at a feast meant for celebration. Tables turned. Literally. Here's what's amazing. Haman built gallows for Mordecai, intending to see him hang. But after Esther's revelation, the king ordered Haman to be executed on those very same gallows. That's what happens when God steps in. He doesn't just deliver, he reverses. The trap the enemy sets often becomes his own undoing. This part of Queen Esther's story reminds us that exposure often comes in the calm, not the chaos. It's in the stillness of a banquet, not the storm of battle, that truth was unveiled. Sometimes, your breakthrough won't look like a fight. It'll look like a dinner invitation wrapped in bold faith. Let's bring that home. Is there a situation in your life where you've been waiting for the right moment to speak, to act, to shift something? Take a note from Esther. Pray, prepare, and let God show you the timing. Strategy is spiritual. You don't need to explode when you can expose. Esther wasn't loud, she wasn't dramatic, but her presence carried weight. That's leadership. In a world chasing noise, be someone who moves with depth. You don't have to speak often to be heard clearly. When your heart is aligned with purpose, your voice carries divine volume. The king's response wasn't just emotional, it was decisive. He didn't debate, didn't ask for more information, he acted. That's what happens when truth confronts power in the right moment, and it teaches us something. When we walk in obedience, God has a way of placing our words into the ears of the right people. This reversal wasn't just about justice, it was about legacy. Mordecai's honor replaced Haman's pride. The Jewish people went from hunted to protected, and all because one woman chose to wait, to pray, and then to speak. Never underestimate what a well-timed word can shift. Queen Esther showed us that battles are often won in the quiet spaces, over meals, in rooms filled with tension, through wisdom rather than war. Her strength wasn't in her volume, but in her vision. And with every word she spoke, a new future began to form. And now, as Esther watches Haman fall and Mordecai rise, the kingdom begins to shift. But while justice had begun, the danger hadn't fully passed. One law was still in place. And it would require another bold move. Haman was gone, but the danger wasn't. The original decree, authorizing the extermination of the Jews, was still active. And in Persian law, a royal decree couldn't simply be revoked. That meant Esther had to step forward again. One act of courage wasn't enough. Destiny required her to speak twice. She entered the king's presence once more, uninvited. Same risk, same fear, but with renewed faith. This time, she didn't just plead for herself. She interceded for her people. Esther understood something many forget. True leadership means returning to the battlefield even after you've already won your own fight. The king listened. And this time, he gave Mordecai and Esther the authority to write a new decree. Not to cancel the old one, but to counteract it. That's a powerful truth. Sometimes we can't erase what's been written, but we can write a better ending. God gives us the power to declare life where death was spoken. So they crafted a new decree. One that allowed the Jews to defend themselves, to stand together, and to fight back on the day their enemies had planned their destruction. This wasn't vengeance. It was preservation, a divine strategy to turn panic into preparation. When the news spread, everything changed. What was once a day of dread became a day of resolve. The Jews didn't run, they prepared. Confidence rose, and across the empire, people began to fear the strength and unity of a people protected by divine favor. Mordecai, once overlooked and forgotten, now walked in royal robes with the king's ring on his hand. That's divine promotion. It reminds us that honor delayed is not honor denied. If you've ever felt unseen, remember, God exalts in his timing, not ours. Stay faithful in the shadows. Your moment is coming. This Bible story reveals a deeper truth about redemption. Sometimes God doesn't remove the threat, he empowers you to face it. Deliverance doesn't always mean escape. Sometimes it means strength to stand. Esther and Mordecai weren't spared from responsibility. They were strengthened for it. Let's make this practical. Are there words spoken over your life, by others or even by yourself, that felt like a decree of defeat? You may not be able to erase them, but you can write a new narrative through prayer, truth, and action. Speak life, speak purpose, and surround yourself with people who will help you write with courage. The king's new decree didn't just empower the Jews, it inspired them. It reminded them that they weren't alone, that heaven was backing them. That shift in mindset turned victims into warriors, and that's exactly what happens when you believe that God is with you. You stop bracing for impact and start preparing for victory. This wasn't just about physical survival, it was about identity. The Jewish people remembered who they were. And when you remember who you are, fear starts to lose its grip. That's why stories like Queen Esther's matter. They remind us that identity, courage, and faith can rewrite any future. So the day came. The enemies attacked, but the Jews were ready. Across 127 provinces, the reversal took place. What was meant for their destruction became their day of defense, and the entire empire watched as a targeted people became a triumphant nation. But even as victory echoed through the streets, something deeper stirred. This wasn't just about one battle, it was about preserving a destiny. And the legacy of that moment, it was just beginning to unfold. Victory had come, but the story wasn't over. The decree of destruction still lingered, like a dark cloud refusing to clear. Esther approached the king once more, this time not for herself, but for her people. Boldness didn't come just once, it had to become a lifestyle, and the king, moved again by her plea, gave permission for a new decree. This new law didn't cancel the old one, it empowered the Jews to fight back. That's a powerful lesson. Sometimes deliverance doesn't mean removal of the battle, but equipping for it. God doesn't always erase the threat, He prepares you to overcome it. Esther and Mordecai knew that protection wasn't passive, it required action. Mordecai was elevated to a new position of power. The man who once sat at the king's gate now wore royal robes and wielded authority. From overlooked to honored. That's the kind of transformation only God can orchestrate. And it wasn't just for his sake, it was for the people. Leadership that lifts others always leaves a legacy. When the day of battle arrived, the Jews stood united. They defended themselves, with courage, not vengeance, and across the empire, from Persia to every province, the outcome was the same. The people of God prevailed. What was meant to destroy them became the very platform for their victory. This Bible story doesn't end with a simple rescue. It ends with celebration. And not just any celebration, but one so profound that it became a tradition. Purim, a feast to remember the day sorrow turned to joy, fear into strength. Because what we don't celebrate, we tend to forget. Esther and Mordecai wrote it down. They made it law. Every year the Jewish people would gather, give gifts, share meals, and tell the story again and again. Why? Because gratitude must be practiced. It keeps the memory of deliverance fresh, and celebration is a form of warfare against despair. Purim reminds us that even the darkest moments can be rewritten, that God doesn't just redeem people, He redeems time. Think about that. What if the days you regret most could become your testimony, your joy? Like Queen Esther, your pain might just birth a future tradition of praise. Let's get practical. How do we honor the victories in our lives? Try this. Create your own version of Purim. Choose a day to reflect on how far you've come. Write it down. Share it with someone. Celebrate with intention, because honoring your journey is part of embracing your calling. And notice, this celebration wasn't centered on Esther alone. It was communal, shared. That's how God works. He blesses individuals to impact nations. Your breakthrough isn't just for you, it's for those connected to you. Queen Esther didn't just save herself, she activated a legacy. Mourning turned to joy, ashes into beauty, fear into strength. And it all started with one yes, one act of courage, one woman who dared to believe she wasn't in that palace by accident. If that was true for her, why wouldn't it be true for you? As the story of Purim continues to be told through generations, one truth remains. God is always writing redemption into the details. Always. And the same divine author who penned Queen Esther's Bible story is still writing yours. Now that you've journeyed through the powerful Bible story of Queen Esther, let me ask you, what will you do with this wisdom? Will you let it be just another inspiring story? Or will you let it shift the way you live, pray, and show up in your everyday decisions? Esther didn't know how it would all unfold. She didn't have every answer. What she had was the courage to say yes. And maybe that's what you're being invited to do now. Not to have it all figured out, but to move forward, even with trembling steps, toward your divine purpose. What if you're in your own such a time as this moment right now? What would happen if you stopped hiding your identity, stopped minimizing your story, and finally stood up with the quiet strength God already placed inside you. This isn't about being perfect, it's about being positioned. And like Queen Esther, your boldness could be the key that unlocks freedom not only for you, but for everyone connected to your life. So before you go, take a moment, reflect. Write down what stirred you most in this story. Share in the comments. What part hit your heart the hardest? What step are you being called to take? And of course, if this message spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, so you never miss a chance to grow deeper in faith and purpose. Your story, just like Esther's, is far from over, and heaven is still writing it. Be ready.